Welcome back to the Women XAI podcast, where we explore the intersection of AI and different sectors. You've heard us cover topics from AI and data to AI and go-to-market. But today, we're diving into AI at a whole new level. We're going to be talking about AI and boardroom governance. AI is reshaping not just how companies launch products, but how leaders, boards, and stakeholders govern responsibly. In this special episode, we're unveiling something new, the AI Board Governance Compass, the framework we built to help boards navigate AI with confidence. It was originally co-authored by all of us on the call and shared at Prism in the Private Directors Association conference.
Can I just say how blown away I am by this talent in this call? As today, we're joined by three incredible voices working on AI at the board governance level. So let's start with Joanna Ridgway, a board member and AI governance advocate.
I'm Joanna Ridgway. I lead global sales at Cein.ai. It's a data analytics platform that unlocks revenue opportunities in 5 days by using AI to analyze B2B CRM information. I'm also a venture partner with Transitions First, and we invest in seed to Series A industrial technologies and advanced materials. Many of those companies are using AI to be more efficient in their operations or to advance their technologies. And kind of my fun fact is I'm a fiddler and I play Celtic, bluegrass, and old time fiddle music with a close friend of mine here in Dallas.
And you've done a TED Talk on fiddling, right?
Yes, we did a TEDx talk about folk fiddle styles and how they evolved from Europe and the traditional Celtic nations and developed into multiple different styles in the US, such as bluegrass, old time, Texas style.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Joanna, and I'm so excited to have you here today with us. Next, we have Tamara Gracon, investor and operator, guiding companies on oversight and one of our advisor at Women XAI. Welcome, Tamara.
It's a pleasure to be here today with all of my co-authors. I run a strategy and change management consultancy, TBG Consulting. Like Joanna, I am also an LP in a venture capital fund. Mine is How Women Invest. Our investment thesis is investing in female founders. I have a passion project for board governance. I am fortunate to sit on the board of two board advocacy organizations, How Women Lead and the Private Directors Association. And I'm really committed to bringing both technology fluency and cognitive diversity into each boardroom that I sit on.
So amazing. Thank you, Tamara. And next up, we have Paula Fontana, operator, community builder, and governance innovator.
I'm Paula Fontana. I'm the founder and CEO of Eudai AI. I also serve as chief marketing officer and a board member at a firm by the name of Illuminar, based in Sydney, Australia. My work really sits at the intersection of AI governance, risk, and human judgment. At Eudai, I work with boards and leadership teams on AI adoption, both internally and looking at what that means from a product and growth perspective. And at Illuminar, we're transforming how organizations from the board level to the front line really think about managing through technological change, using habit science and microsimulations to make risk management something that we make habit.
Paula, I appreciate that you brought up disclosures. That's something we address in the framework and something that's so critical. We want management to disclose to the board how they're using AI, how they're using it, incorporating in their product or service, how they're using it to make decisions. We also want to ensure proper disclosures back to the employees and the various stakeholders that may be impacted by the workforce changing or using it in your product and service. And there's some regulations that are starting to address how companies use AI and ensuring that's disclosed and things like credit decisions, if that's used in that kind of product to a consumer. So we really want this framework to encompass all of those things, including how you disclose the use of AI.
Absolutely. And I think that was the cool part about working on that in the group, because we were able to all kind of bring our own expertise and experiences in this area and put it into the compass.
And of course, your hosts today are me, Reut Lazo, co-founder and co-CEO of Women XAI, and on the board of AI 2030. And of course, Jenny K. Pollock, co-CEO and co-founder of Women XAI, a fractional CMO and a board director.
Hello, I am so excited to be in conversation with these leaders and talking about AI at that board governance level.
And now, for those who are hearing this for the first time, I would like to get us started in what is the governance and AI compass? What does it mean?
I'd be happy to take that one, Reut. So Paula and Joanna and Jenny and I got accepted to speak at a conference, PRISM, the Private Directors Association National Conference, to present a practical application of AI in the boardroom, really focused on case studies. And as we went through the case studies to prepare for this conference, we looked for a framework that we could rely on to sort of ground the case study so that everyone was looking through the same lens at the case study. And we really struggled to find anything that was workable. We found several great papers that were 20 or 30 pages long that covered the scope of AI. But when it came to what do you actually talk about in the boardroom, they were often one or two basic questions that only talked about a very narrow segment of how impactful AI is expected to be for many companies. We looked at what was out there in other like risk settings or other just board governance frameworks and really just decided that we were going to have to write our own. So the five of us all worked together to co-author our own framework that we thought covered the scale of AI, but also had a meaningful way to rate the issues so that you could pick 2 or 3 or 4 to focus on at a time, because we all know if you've got 20 priorities, you don't really have any. So we were delighted to give people something tangible to work with.
That is great to hear. And I think what you mentioned, Tamara, that, this framework is so different from what's out there because it's really executable, right? If a board member asks, like, why should I care about AI governance now? Like, why should they care about this and look inside of this framework?
It will be the most disruptive technology of our generation. So whether it impacts how your employees do their work, what skills they need, how you deliver products to customers, how your competitors deliver products to customers, the price of energy for everything else that you do in your company, and, and broader, more societal impacts. Do we continue to see a concentration of wealth with the people who have mastered AI? Or do we spread the gains from the efficiency of AI more broadly throughout society? It has deep, meaningful impacts at every level of corporate decision making.
AI is moving so fast. The scale of adoption has exceeded any other novel technology. So companies, businesses, competitors, they're all trying to figure out how to use it. And many people's placement of board directors, the board, the company, they might be on different stages of that technology adoption curve. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with this framework is how do I identify where to start? How do I identify how to ensure a really effective risk governance from the board level as companies navigate this while they're flying the plane?
That's incredible.
It might be helpful to cover just how the overall framework is laid out. So in our governance framework, we have 4 key quadrants. One is you as an individual board member and what are your competencies and what do you need to take care of to handle AI in the boardroom. The next is really the board as a whole. And this is, do you put this with the audit committee because they handle other risk matters? Do you create a technology committee that handles AI and cybersecurity issues? Do you have a broader risk committee? But does the board itself incorporate AI into the agenda and its committee responsibilities in a way that makes sense for your business? The third quadrant is from an organizational perspective. And that's what has the CEO put in place, what AI is available to use, what AI is off limits to use, what are we doing to train our employees, and, is it something that's used internally or customer facing? And then the last quadrant is stakeholder impact. So we're focused on private companies here in this conversation, but if it were a public company, this would obviously include shareholders. But this is your customers, your competitors, the community in which you operate, just the broader impact beyond your direct line of business. And we think that there needs to be board level focus in each of these quadrants in order to maximize the input, the impact of AI, and to make sure that you're really mitigating all the risks that are necessary.
Thank you for sharing that, Tamara. And can you tell us which of the 4 quadrants usually sparks the most discussion when you present this?
I think it depends a little bit on the nature of the conversation. If we're at Prism, where we're really talking about continuing professional education essentially for board members, I think there's a lot of focus on the individual level and the board as a whole. I think if we're talking to somebody who is an existing board member and they're looking to bring this into their enterprise, there's more focus on the board level and the organization level. For most private companies, they've got enough priorities in those first 3 quadrants that they're not putting a ton of time in that last stakeholder quadrant because they have their hands full with the first 3.
I'd like to add as our thought with this is you'll get started, you'll do the self-assessment and pick your top 3 or 4 priorities. And hopefully over time, you're able to focus on other quadrants. So if you start at the individual one and you're working your way up, maybe in a couple quarters, you will be focusing on stakeholder.
That's amazing.
That's a perfect tee-up to you, Joanna, to talk more about how you actually use the framework through our scoring mechanism and how you can see the time series of its impact.
Exactly. So when we were designing this framework, we really wanted to provide a guide or a way for it to be used by the board members that are trying to figure out what are these top priorities. And so the scoring sheet, it really provides detailed questions that align to each area in the framework. And it's really dynamic. So this framework allows you to score on a scale of 1 to 5. So 1 being you are in really good shape here. Your board has a really good handle on this section. 5 being this area really needs attention. And what we wanted to do as well is add a multiplier on from the next column over that really allows you to identify, is this an area that's applicable to the core business strategy of how they operate or how they serve their clients? Or is it an issue that's really impactful for the broader ecosystem? So is there a regulatory concern? Is there competitive pressure? Are there international thoughts or geopolitical issues that could really impact you using AI in this way? Does the board need to pay attention to that? So we want there to be the ability to really put a finer point that this is an issue to really lean in to and create those priorities. And as Jenny helpfully shared, this is intended to be dynamic. It's intended to be iterative. So you can really look at this it's a living, breathing document that you can come back to help guide some of your focus as a board. And the questions that you were showing on the screen there, we spent a lot of time. We spent hours and hours really, really thoughtfully creating these questions so they can really dig into the details and be really distinct ways to dive into what's going on at the company and how to identify those key areas. So when Tamara was helpfully talking about the different areas of concern, it might be, is management reporting to the board? Do they have a set of KPIs? Do we have a risk management framework in place? So the board can really understand how the company is using AI. And then also just looking around the corner to anything, the competitive pressure, or how that might inform a board making a recommendation or a decision that's being proposed to them. As always, we feel the individual element here is really important. So ensuring that there is a process whereby the board is AI ready. So are they being trained? Are we bringing in experts to help them understand the impact of incorporating AI? Or do we need to bring those experts in to ensure that board members feel confident to make those decisions? But we also want a really dynamic conversation in the boardroom about AI. So we want to create that type of dynamic, and we feel this framework allows the board to really have those discussions in a thoughtful way.
Right. And what kind of discussions do you hear when you bring this framework and especially this scoring sheet to the board? What kind of conversation tends to emerge from looking at the sheet and starting to, scoring the different priorities and lines here?
I think what's really critical is that what emerges is all the different areas AI can impact a company's trajectory and how important it is to really make it a dedicated part of a board agenda. So not that that hasn't been on everyone's minds previously, but this really guides the conversation. So when I was telling a few friends of mine who are sitting on corporate and private boards that we were looking at this, they said, I just don't know what questions to ask management to understand what's going on, or ensuring that management is even aware of what's going on at the company. How are employees already using it? And is there a risk governance or a framework in place to monitor that? And of course, we've seen a lot recently about reporting that many AI projects or pilots have failed. That MIT report recently was published. And what we've found, being at an AI company myself, is our perspective is those pilots might not have been designed in a way to set them up for success. They maybe didn't have a strong data foundation in order to implement an AI strategy, or they weren't ready to iterate and find ways to really monitor the impact of those solutions. And so we feel that this framework can really help boards make decisions in a more strategic way if it makes sense to allocate resources, if it comes to the board level, to those kinds of initiatives, because they can be transformative for a company, either transform how they're delivering a product or service or how they just operate. And especially, we always want to keep in mind how this impacts the workforce. So we really want to pay attention to the stakeholders. Are the employees at the company receiving the skills they need to be successful in this new age? There was some helpful surveys that came out recently from KPMG that a lot of employees are really concerned about management incorporating AI in a strategy. And so we feel that that should raise to the board level to really be thoughtful and encourage management and challenge them on how this is impacting how they're leading in this new
What I
age.
really appreciated about what you were saying, Joanna, is that, yeah, there's all these pilots out there and we're hearing that they're not going well, but it's the underlying systems, it's the underlying data that gets fed into that. AI is really only as good as the information you give it. Everyone says garbage in, garbage out. I'm hoping for a rebrand. I want gold in, gold out, the positive angle. But it's true.
Well, we at Cein, our moniker is garbage in, gold out, because that is literally what we do is we clean and enhance and score that data first before we're applying our models for growth. We can still do it in 5 days, but that's funny that you bring that up, because we feel very strongly that an important data foundation, a strong data foundation, is critical. And that's one of the most critical questions a board can ask a management team or the CTO. What's going on from a data perspective? Are we ready to navigate this novel situation?
I think one thing that we should touch on, just taking a bit of a step back, is what we're hearing is that CEOs feel incredible pressure to try something, even if it's going to fail, because they feel like if they don't dip their toe in the AI waters, that their company will simply cease to exist. That a competitor will beat them to the punch, or customers won't trust that they're still at the forefront of their business, and that they have to try something, and that they can't let perfect be the enemy of the good enough. And boards typically operate in a risk framework. And there are quite literally infinite risks with AI. There's so much more unknown than there is known at this moment in time. And those competing fears are very difficult to navigate. And then when you layer onto that the pace of AI change, if you've got a board that is well established and meets once a quarter, and AI news and strategy changes quite literally daily, how do you reconcile keeping the board in the loop when the board wants to talk once a quarter? So how you reconcile that and create some mechanism, whether it's a separate committee, you empower your executive committee, you have some separate hybrid between management and the board that can navigate and has authority to make decisions, but is still consistent with your corporate bylaws. But AI is a different animal and it requires a different response than how I think many boards operate on a daily basis.
It's a
And
great
so,
point, Tamara. And I think going back to our scoring sheet being a living, breathing document, that's a way board members could use it in between board meetings as they evaluate new information or as they're asked to review information before a meeting, is coming back to that framework and revisiting it as a way to prepare for the meeting or the decision at hand.
and I think the other challenge we have is we had boards, we had a huge wave of cybersecurity rules and regulations, particularly for public companies. We saw that broadly adopted by private companies. But the scale and scope of AI is too big for you to have one tech fluent board member. And we know cognitive diversity is one of my passions. You can't have only one person in the room who's got an in-depth, knowledgeable tech point of view. And you're not likely to find someone who is conversant on all aspects of AI, much less tech, the full spectrum of technology. So you've really either got to upskill your board or expand your board or change your board member or your board composition to adjust to what is going to be an issue for the next likely decade of critical importance to the enterprise.
Absolutely. And I think about, the board matrix so often of what skills are needed. And I'm looking forward to seeing AI embedded in more of those and to have it be really part of the skill set that boards are looking for because it is so, so needed. I wanted to talk about too is the case studies that we made because as we were presenting at Prism, everyone was coming from different boards and we wanted them to be able to apply the framework. One of the things that we did was develop some case studies. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about why we did that, how we did that, and what people can do with these case studies.
We did put together some case studies. It's so much easier to learn a new skill by putting it into practice. And we did at Prism when we presented, we knew that many of the members throughout the Private Director Association membership represent a variety of companies, from privately held manufacturing companies to tech companies to life sciences, healthcare, et cetera.
Case studies really make it real. I think particularly for boards that are looking to navigate new uncertainties with AI. In this particular case, we looked at 2 real-world scenarios involving the use of AI as a function of commercial decision making. So 2 contrasting cases in this case. One was a firm by the name of Midtech Components. It was part of an overall business transformation initiative or proposed business transformation initiative, a 40-year-old family manufacturing company where they saw significant loss of margins over time. And the proposal in that case was to pivot the business away from making parts to something much more AI predictive, so insight based. And there are 450 jobs at stake in this particular instance. And so the question really for the board was whether to reinvent the company or to protect the existing business. The second the second case study was around data flow solutions, which was more of a build versus buy dilemma, also very common with boards and executive teams navigating AI transformation. In this particular case, it was a PE-backed SaaS company with 18 months to exit, where 40% of their customers were law firms. And so there was a significant question around client data sovereignty alongside PE pressure for growth. And that exit scenario. And so the specific decision in that case was whether to proceed with third-party AI which would mean less investment upfront and faster turnaround, a greater data exposure versus an on-prem solution, a proprietary, which would require much more investment on the tune of $2 million over the course of 6 months, but full control over the data protection elements of that particular question. So the question there was really speed to market or data protection. And I think for boards needing to evolve their practice to be something like helicopter boards, right, where you're not only zooming out to look at the broader picture, but how do you zoom in appropriately and work with the business to help govern important decisions that ultimately define the future of the company.
And when we presented it at Prism, what we found is we had groups of 8 to 10 people that used the framework and applied it to these different cases. And we had we had some really significant evaluations from, the groups did a good job of identifying those top 2 to 3 priorities. That was the objective, is use the framework, identify the top 2 or 3 priorities that should be a focus given the situation at hand. And we discovered we had a lot of very smart, experienced people in the room that really aligned in a couple key areas and then had some difference of opinion on others. So it was really interesting to see it work in action.
I think there were plenty of surprises for all of us as you walk the room. I think a lot of the board members, there was a major aha around just the complexity of considerations and things that they need to be increasingly mindful of. How do they better prepare, for decision making in the context of not really knowing, all of the answers, right? And I think that was a major struggle for a lot of the board members. How do you make decisions with incomplete information? And in this case, it's less about the tech stack and more about decision integrity. And so understanding in that case, how is intelligence being distributed across the organization? Who's accountable for its outputs, and how do we test that alignment with intent? Asking the right questions. So this is a shift really from assurance after the fact to something more aligned to active inquiry, which I think is new to a lot of board members.
I'll say just another key takeaway, and this was part by design and I think part in reality. In neither case study was there enough information to score every aspect of our framework. So there's this total of 16 questions. And so our advice is, if you don't have enough information to score it, we recommend leaving it unscored until you have enough information to score it. Otherwise, everything is red and you're trying to focus on everything at once and it doesn't provide a ton of clarity. But I think that is very practical in what boards are facing with AI, because the tools change so often and management often doesn't have a handle completely on what their vision is for AI adoption in the company. And I think you have board members who often have very different perspectives on what the right AI strategy might be for the company. So that sort of confusion, I think, is very common. And it just, again, provides clarity on where do you need more information to make a decision. And to be able to do that in a coherent time series where you're tackling 1 or 2 things every time your committee meets and continuing to focus on what the next priority is.
That's such a good point, Tamara, because as a board member, you don't often have every single piece of information that you need. And sometimes you have to go get it or ask questions so you can get that information from someone else who is in the room. I think that, having to go through that in the case study is actually a really good mirror of what happens in the boardroom sometimes.
There are a lot of people who will say that asking good questions is the superpower of a good board director. So
I was
totally
gonna
agree, Jenny.
Agree with that point, Tamara, is that's what we heard. The feedback we received once we presented this framework and let it out into the world is this is a great, it's a tool I can use to understand what questions I should ask. It's a tool to help me look around that corner. I wanted to point out that the people that worked on this case study, what we kept hearing from them is that it was an effective tool that could allow them to ask those right questions, to Tamara's point, or to prepare for an upcoming meeting, to really understand what are those top priorities, but what are some priorities that I need to be thinking about down the line, and how do we start to address that?
Absolutely. And I wanted to talk about something because so many of the times when I'm talking to people who are not AI experts, they think it's all about the technical things and how does the LLM work? And while that's important, there's also a governance angle that is really important. So I wanted to ask you both, what does good governance look like in the age of AI?
I think it's really anchored with curiosity. I think you've got to come into it wanting to know more, being open to learning from people who do have more technical background, and they're really synthesizing the new technical information with what you know about the company and the employees, the company values, the products that you offer customers, and how do you marry all of those elements together in a way that really is going to bring the company into the future.
I think it's always super rewarding when you see your work out in the wild. And I love that. I mean, we could have spent a lot more time in research mode, but I love that we honor the tenet of progress over perfection. And I think that's absolutely how boards need to be thinking about that today. We don't know all the answers. We don't have a lot of transparency, even in terms of how the technology works in a lot of ways. And we don't know exactly where it's all headed. We don't have a North Star collectively governing where this is all coming together. If we can really honor the principle of progress over perfection, we'll stand a better chance of aligning it in a way that best serves the needs of the organizations that we serve.
I also think that what's exciting about AI, what excites me about it, is it blurs the lines from traditional functional roles. And it can also blur lines for board members that might feel they sit in one seat. But thinking critically about this, to Tamara's point, and Paula, what you all have shared, is one of the most important elements of good risk governance. Being ready to iterate, being ready to redesign pilots, asking the questions of both the CTO, but also the CMO or the other leadership team members on how it will impact them and then their ability to align to the strategy that the board has set and approved. So I think that it really creates a more collaborative environment, I hope, for the board to be thoughtful on how it approaches governance in the age of AI.
That's one of the things.
To make sure that we don't lose our humanity in all of this. Like, AI is moving at a pace of change. We know that change is hard for a lot of people. We know that it causes anxiety and stress. And so putting our HR, all of our people skills at work, are we implementing it in a way that creates a safe environment for our employees? Are we providing upskilling? Are we providing retraining? Like, what are we doing to make sure that we still have a workforce that's motivated and excited and feels safe? And you don't have to be a technologist to do any of that.
One of the things I love about what Jenny and Tamara, you helpfully suggested we include on the individual side is, how are boards using AI? Is there a way or opportunity for boards to consider the use in AI to make them more efficient, whether it's prepping pre-meeting materials, supporting some of that research or active work of the board? And I think that is a great way, with obviously relevant and appropriate safeguards in place, since you are often dealing with non-public information, but the ability for board members to safely practice AI if they're trying to get comfortable with it. And I really like that as a way for this framework to be useful.
That's not dumping your whole board book in an open tool. See what AI thinks of your board book, by the way.
No, you can have a local, pure way to use AI tools, or to ensure proper communication. There's lots of way to secure that. I would suggest calling the CTO and making sure everything is.
Well, and that's the thing about the framework is that this should be discussed and this should be part of your company's policy about how and where you use AI. I really appreciate, Joanna, that you mentioned, a local model. There's also, enterprise level. And even in some of the companies that do provide the board books, they're talking about adding AI into those systems. And so it'll be really interesting to see how this space evolves. We've touched on a lot of pieces from individual to the board quadrant, to stakeholder and organization. I wanted to now step over to our lightning round. I would love to hear from each of you. Which AI tool do you have strong feelings about this week?
I'd say Perplexity's new finance capabilities. So much of what I've seen with AI has either been in like the graphic world with Canva or all of these large language models that are very like word heavy, word dense, but we haven't seen a lot of its applications with numbers that are commercially available. So as someone who spent 20 years at KPMG, I'm excited to play with the Excel functionality.
More personal related. So we're building some really exciting agentic solutions at Cein.ai, but since I've been trying to learn about agents and how they're deployed, the model context protocols or integrators that are available with Claude has saved me a lot of time. For example, plugging into my email and calendar and checking all of the communication that I receive from my children's schools and I need to pay attention to or not. And what is the action item I really need to do? So my child actually has a costume and the definition to the vocabulary word for the vocabulary parade last week instead of completing it. Is hopefully it can continue to help in our personal lives, us being more efficient and being able to do all the things we want to do because we're trying to balance 50 different things at once.
AI can be a great equalizer. Next question. What is your go-to resource for learning about AI?
The AI Daily Brief is a great podcast, other than Women XAI, of course. But I do like that the AI Daily Brief provides an overview of the headlines and why they matter, as well as typically a deep dive into a particular topic or a new model release or something. And I find it very helpful to stay up to speed on what's going on.
I will say that I just finished reading the book Empire of AI by Karen Howe, and that has really changed how I think about AI. It was helpful in providing context to evaluate AI solutions. So that's one thing that I would recommend, but that's a longer read.
It's on my list. I cannot wait to get started with that one.
I try to follow a lot of AI innovators, but also a lot of AI detractors to get balanced perspective. I think that's really important for all of us. But if you're looking for a true AI evangelist that's on the forefront of innovation in the space, I follow Neil Hoyne, who is the chief strategist at Google.
What is your non-AI recommendation for the week?
I just finished Onyx Storm, the third book in the Fourth Wing trilogy, and it was riveting and surprising and shocking right up until the very end. So highly recommend.
Amazing.
I just finished Slow Horses. I love that show. And I'm also reading the books. So I highly recommend both. That was one. But Table Manners podcast is amazing. And I do not have time to cook right now. I love cooking. But what I love about Table Manners is they're always cooking something I would want to cook.
I would totally recommend reading The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. I think what's different about that, especially set in the scene that we're currently living right now, it's the perfect reset. And it's really this reminder that human intuition and creativity still matter, even with algorithms governing our lives. This is true. I think it really goes back to what we were talking about with progress over perfection and asking better questions earlier.
So, I want to close with one action or perspective you hope the listeners of today's episodes can take back to their own boards.
I would say that AI is so broad that if you're just talking about AI without a structure in place to have a meaningful conversation that you can hold each other accountable from board meeting to board meeting, you're really going to miss out on the impact that it could have for your organization. So, whether you adopt our framework or find another one that you love, you've got to have some structure in place. It's got to be measurable, quantifiable, and able to look at in a time series. And I really think that you need to consider empowering some subset of your board to talk about AI at the frequency of the business need and not at the pace of your board meetings.
Seek out experts or people to advise you, whether you use our framework as a starting point, and we hope you do, but really evaluate how you can start learning about AI, whether it's using it on your own or asking a management team member of how they're starting to incorporate it. So you can just start to get educated. I think that's a really important place to start as well.
Don't wait for the crisis or a headline to force the conversation for your organization. Start by asking, how is AI already shaping our decisions? And how do we know that it's aligned with our values, our intent, et cetera? That can really shift the conversation from passive awareness to active oversight in a new way. I think one thing that I am totally loving about this community is the authenticity of the dialogue. And like I'm never a fan of kind of covering up the ugly in these conversations, and not, we need to discuss the hard stuff, I think is ultimately um the way, right? And so sharing stories from the boardroom, what's working, what's confusing, what's uncomfortable.
Thank you all for being part of this conversation and for co-authoring the AI Board Governance Compass. To our listeners, download the full white paper, subscribe to Women XAI, and join our community. You can do all of that on our website, www.womenxai.com, and help shape the future of AI governance together.